morning. Good morning and welcome to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn and I'm very pleased to be your Director of Music Ministries. I'd like to invite you to join in the singing this morning with hymn number 355. Number 355, We Lift Our Hearts in Thanks Today. Hymn number 355. Please rise in body or in spirit as you're so moved and join in the singing. Somewhere. We'll start with love.
Gonna keep on
And then we have an assembled throng. Shall we do 6 parts of round? This group over here, and this group over here, and this group over here, and this group over here. Well, 5. All right, self-select. If you're overwhelmed by the round, you can always just sing Alleluia. There's infinite choice in a round. 393. I'm so excited. Let's sing it together twice, and then we'll break into a round. Can you do this like Here we go. You all together again. One more time, all together. Good morning. Please take a moment and greet your neighbors.
Within you there is light, the same light as the source, the same radiance that is in all creatures. May this small flame be a constant reminder to you of your true nature and your kinship with all beings.
I'd like to invite you to join your hearts and minds in the spirit of worship with these words by Annie Lamont from her book, Help, Thanks, Wow, the 3 Essential Prayers. I do not know much about prayer, but I have come to believe over the last 25 years that there's something to be said about keeping prayer simple. Help, thanks, wow. You may, in fact, be wondering what I even mean when I use the word prayer. It's certainly not what TV Christians mean. It's not for display purposes like plastic sushi or neon. Prayer is private, even when we pray with others. It is communication from the heart to that which surpasses understanding. My 3 prayers are variation on help, thanks, and wow. That's all I'll ever need beside the silence and the pause sufficient for me to stop, close my eyes, and turn inward. to actually be able to talk, my mother taught me a prayer that she made part of our evening going to bed routine for my whole childhood. It was a simple prayer. God bless Mommy, God bless Daddy, God bless Gail, that was me, and God bless John, who was my baby brother. Well, few years later, well, really just a year later, there's a picture of John and I, still too little to really hold the new baby, Anne. And so, of course, then we added, God bless Anne. I looked a little perplexed, like, where did this come from? But we added it to the list. And then, about a year and a half later, I was actually old enough to hold the next new baby, Mark. I look more disgusted than perplexed, like, where's my baby doll? It would have been a lot better than this. But we added, God bless Mark. And so on. There was God bless Jeannie, who we did play with like a doll. She turned out okay anyway. And then there was God bless Beth, who actually was a lot of work for me. I was assigned to taking care of her as a toddler. She was not easy. And then there was God bless Lee, that by then I was just, oh no, it's just more chores. Okay, so by the time I had 6 younger brothers and sisters, and we all had to pray this before we went to bed, we did it really fast. It was almost like in 2 breaths. Okay, God bless Mommy, Daddy, Gail, John, Ann, Mark, Jean, Beth, Lee. We kind of said all our names together in one word. And, but sometimes I actually would pause in my prayer, especially when I got my own room and finally had some peace and quiet, which was a very big deal. So I would think, like, for instance, let's say it had been a really bad day, and my brothers and sisters had all been mocking me. They used to call me Gail the Whale because I was pretty round during most of my childhood. And I would, like, get to their name, John, God bless John, God bless Anne. I start going, and then I go, no, help. Help them be nicer to me. Help me be not so hurt. Help. Or how about if it was a good day and my mom had actually had time, because she was pretty exhausted, to come up and give me a hug, good night, kiss me. And I think, God bless Mom. Thank you. I really appreciated when she had time to do that. Or let's say it was a great day. One of my favorite things that used to happen when I was a kid is we'd have a lot of snow, and all of us would go out and go sledding all day long down the hill in front of our house. And then when I'd be, God bless John, Ann, Mark, Jean, Beth, I think, wow, we had a lot of fun today. Wow. Well, you know, I grew up and left home, and then each one of them grew up and left home, and now we live all over the country. I mean, really, thousands of miles apart. Even my parents moved away. We all live far apart. And every once in a while, I still find myself almost doing that prayer. But it's kind of changed. And because I don't know so much about who I'm praying to. Might be God, I don't know. And I'm not always sure what a blessing is. But what I find myself doing is I can see my mother and my father, can see them, John and Ann and Mark, and I realize what I can see them, I'm imagining them feeling really happy, looking well. They're not suffering, they're at peace. And it makes me feel connected to them. So connected, even though we're so far apart. And for that prayer that doesn't even have any words, I am very grateful. So ends my story. And Karina here is going to make an announcement.
Thank you, Gail. So we would just like to sing off the children to Ari, and you can take out the children's blessing on the back of the gray hymnal and join us, please.
Good morning. My name is Valerie Martin. I am a member of Nominating Committee and co-chair of Worship Committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here in the sanctuary and those joining us online to worship this morning. In order to reach a wider community than those able to be physically present on Sunday morning, our services are live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. Joys and concerns are not live streamed or recorded. Before I continue, let me remind you to silence your cell phones. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation, we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We deepen our relationships as we create a compassionate, welcoming community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask you to wear the paper name tags because it helps us recognize you as someone we'd like to meet. If you're seeking a spiritual home, we hope you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or visiting from another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table after the service to have any questions answered. People become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you are considering joining the church, please talk with Reverend Gail. Following the service, we hope everyone will enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social area, where you'll also find information about current opportunities for engagement and reflection. There are a number of announcements in the weekly bulletin that I hope you will take home and read. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gail Rust-Waymack. We are all wounded people, but wounds have the capacity to instill great knowledge, compassion, and power to heal. We carry baggage, memories, experiences from life's journey that shape us from the depths of our soul to our outward physical appearance. I'm here in this faith community because of my wounds and the circle of love. My brother, Dan Rust, and his spouse, Janice Nolan, were active, involved members of First UU more than 20 years ago. Through Dan's illness and ultimately his death, I was introduced to Unitarian Universalism and the power of love beyond anything I had ever experienced as a Protestant. Dan and I grew up in a God-fearing Southern Baptist family. We were taught and believed in the literal truth and inerrancy of the Bible, original sin and human depravity, the need to accept Christ as one's Savior in order to avoid eternal damnation, a literal heaven and hell, a God of vengeance, and the importance of filtering out diverse beliefs and worldviews that conflicted with our own. We were deeply loved and nurtured by parents who firmly believed that life on this earth was temporary evil and madness on the way to an everlasting nirvana of life after death. As a wounded Christian, Dan, through his illness and death 21 years ago, gave me the gift of this faith community. I know now I was at a point in my life where I was ready to be vulnerable, to be with and embrace people of many backgrounds, many beliefs. People who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. People working for more justice and more love in their own lives and for the world. I never quit Jesus. In fact, being a UU has brought me greater understanding of who Jesus was and is as a lover of all people. First UU offers me so many opportunities to live my values out loud and not alone. This faith community helps guide my woundedness to be in service to others. When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we can become wounded healers. I joyfully give my time, my energy, my love, and my financial gifts to support the ministry of First UU, as together we experience the interwoven nature of the universe, trusting that none of us travels life's journey alone.
I'd like to invite you all to take a deep breath, become more fully present to this sacred space, to this gathered community, and to yourself. And as you become more fully present to yourself, you may become more aware of those moments from the last weeks or days or hours that you bring here with you, especially those moments that have struck your spirit at its core. And if any of you have such a profound joy, sorrow, or concern that you'd like to make more present to this gathered community, you're invited to do so. Our lay minister this morning, Gloria Ballard, will help you place a stone in this water that symbolizes our community. If you would like Gloria or me to read of that joy or concern, please write it out on the yellow slips of paper in your pew as legibly as possible and hand it to me when you place your stone. Thank you. I invite you to hold this joy as well as all of those joys, concerns, and sorrows that are sitting in your lips unspoken into the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, we hold the joys with wow and gratitude, so much awe and wonder as we feel so connected to this interconnected web of all existence through the beauty of nature and the interaction with people. We are so grateful when those connections happen. Even when we are lamenting, those connections hold us up. Even when we are needing help, we become more grateful for those who respond, knowing that they cannot always help make our pain and sorrow go away, but they can help through their connection and love. Spirit of life and love, we are awed. We are grateful. And we cry out for help. May it be so. Blessed be. and amen. Well, at this time, our offering will be received. As many of you know, 1/2 of the loose cash that you donate, we share with Mission beyond their church walls. This month, it is going to Habitat for Humanity to help fund the house that we help build with an interfaith crew in the fall for Habitat here in Nashville. And also wanted you to know that if you want to give online or with your mobile device, you can look in the order of service to see how to do that, or if you're visiting us online today, you can look at our website at thefun.org. I want to thank you so very, very much for your ongoing generosity.
Good morning. Several years ago, I spent an hour every week participating in a trauma support group. At the beginning of each session, the facilitators would ask us to check in 3 different ways. How are we feeling emotionally, physically, and spiritually? It was a simple enough request, and I did okay with most of it. My emotions were always easy for me to articulate. Checking in physically was as simple as reporting whether or not I was tired or sore in a particular spot. But when it came to the spiritual check-in, I all but shut down. After weeks of this question and being one of people who said pass to the spiritual check-in, one of the other participants asked for clarity around how to answer that question. If they, like me, didn't hold a belief in God or a higher power, what type of answer could they give? How could we gain any kind of context to frame an answer? The advice we received was simple. In that moment, at the time of check-in, did we feel connected to something outside of ourselves, or did we feel cut off? The something outside of ourselves could be a higher power, or our community, our family, our purpose, the universe, you name it? Did we feel connected, or did we feel isolated? Suddenly, the question had context for those of us who didn't consider ourselves to be spiritual in any of the ways we knew before. Suddenly, that check-in became a lot easier to do. The experience of having my context for spirituality shifted in that way had a huge ripple effect in my life, the outcomes of which include my arrival in this congregation a year or so afterwards. Prior to that, I had spent a good part of my life feeling like I was doing spirituality wrong because I didn't naturally align with the theology and dogma that I was brought up with, and the parts of that theology that did sink into my belief system actually did the work of disconnecting me from myself in many ways, from my self-worth, my sense of agency, and my sense of worthiness. If Anne Lamont's 3 essential prayers are help, thanks, and wow, the versions of those prayers I grew up with were, "Thy will be done, glory be to God, and Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner." And also as a child, I never could comprehend that if faith the size of a mustard seed could move mountains, then why did it seem that none of my prayers were answered? Did I truly have no faith at all, no matter how hard I tried? My relationship with prayer and my religion experienced a seismic shift when I was 13, and my 18-year-old cousin Travis was in a car accident. After we got the news, I remember my mother falling apart. I remember her collapsing into my arms and thinking about how strange it felt to be comforting my mother in that way. At some point, I slipped out of her room and headed outside. I stood on the sidewalk in front of our house and I started to pray. I prayed for my cousin's life. But a lot of what my pleading focused on was actually sparing my mother's pain. God, I don't think she can handle this. Please let him live. Travis did not live. No one was spared pain. I had never prayed so hard and so desperately in my life, yet he was gone. Standing up here today, recounting that story, I also recall a profound sense of shame that I carried. It echoes that similar shame I felt for much of my life, shame over the worry that I was doing it wrong, that I prayed for the wrong thing. I should have been begging for his life only. My focus was in the wrong place. I was selfish. My prayer wasn't answered, or maybe as desperately as I was begging, no one was listening. After that day, I was almost scared to pray. I always felt guilty about what I prayed for, if it was anything other than "Thy will be done" or "Have mercy on me, a sinner." And in those moments when I was feeling the most scared, sad, or desperate, and did indeed cry out for help, I just felt so selfish. There was no comfort in the praying. The time I spent just after separating from my church were spent angry at religion and the very notion of spirituality. And I think a lot of my anger was stemming from the fact that despite all the pain it had caused me, I had loved being in the church. I was angry that it hadn't held space for me. I loved the sense of mystery. I loved the sense of being a part of something larger than any 4 walls could hold. So when I sat in that circle of women that day and was told that spirituality could be tied to a sense of connection, it was like 1,000 puzzle pieces started shuffling into place. It now seemed that moments of connection with myself, like meditation, or moments of connecting with others in relationship, or in a protest, or in creating, or in giving, those were the ways that I reached out to my higher power. Those too were my prayers. Not too shy of a year ago, my daughter was born. After a delivery that was very scary and nothing like we could have imagined, my wife was faced with a difficult recovery and our baby was recuperating in the NICU. I remember laying on the 2 inches of foam they call a sofa in that hospital room, so exhausted, so scared. And I laid there and I prayed. I prayed for my daughter, for my wife, for myself, for strength and in the short term, the ability to sleep. And I realized that something else had shifted. I didn't feel guilty about those prayers. I didn't feel alone. Even without a belief in an interventionist God that could or would swoop down and fix things, I didn't feel like I was doing anything in vain. I felt comforted, even by the act of praying, because in doing so, I was reminding myself that I was not alone. I was reminding myself that through my fear and exhaustion, I was connected to something much larger than myself. The journey I've been on with prayer has been fraught. It's been complicated. I imagine that it will continue to evolve. But I know that as my spirituality and even my theology continues to change, what won't change is the fact that I will always have a need to reach out to something larger than myself. And I'm thankful that I feel no hesitation now in saying help, saying thanks, or saying wow. For our meditation today, let us enter into this time by checking in with ourselves. How are you spiritually today? Do you feel connected or disconnected? If connected, call to mind those actions, relationships, and practices that brought you to this state. If not, call to mind a time when you did feel a part of something larger than yourself. What actions, relationships, and practices brought you to that place? Now, take a moment to reimagine those things, those moments, those actions as prayers, as ways that you reached outside of yourself and gained comfort, peace, and resolve. Imagine the prayers of each person reaching out and interlocking, creating a web that supports us, holds us, moves us forward. May it be so.
I'd like to say a couple of words about our middle hymn before we sing. Kumbaya has been dragged across the world and sung and misappropriated. And it is my desire today that we sing together and do justice to the people who brought it to the world. Formerly enslaved and the descendants of enslaved Africans in North Carolina, where the song was collected. This song is a lament. The people who are singing are people who are seeking freedom. I'd like to invite you to rise in body and spirit as you're so moved and join in singing Kumbaya.
So I was praying hard on Tuesday night at the NOAA, that's the Nashville Organized for Action and Hope board meeting. During the meeting, we talked about yet another tragedy here in Nashville where 5 children, 12 to 15, killed a 24-year-old young musician. And one of our leaders in NOAA, who was a social worker over at Napier Community Center, knew all those 5 children, every single one. And she was heartbroken because she knew those children's lives. She knew that their parents were poor in prison, that the schools gave them no support, that they were already in what we call the school-to-prison pipeline, where they were not supported in school on how to interact with others. And she saw how that extreme poverty and lack of resources destroyed not just that one young man's life, as heartbroken, of course, that everybody was, it destroyed 6 lives. They're already talking about trying those children in our wonderful prison system as adults. I hope that doesn't happen, because that's 52 years, even though Supreme Court has said we can't have life imprisonment of people that age. Here in Tennessee, that's 52 years if you don't get life. So when they asked me to pray at the end of the meeting, I was in despair. I was crying out in lament for help. Now, I even used the word Lord because 3/4 of the people in that room used the word Lord. I have to tell you, the joy that came out of that despair, being in that room with those people who all were in despair to other and all spent a lot of their time trying to change that. So there were fewer children growing up in poverty, changing the school system, making steps forward. Through the whole meeting, we could see what we call the wins, the step forward. So that happens fewer times. And yet, there's other big challenges in our city to come. So that pray was the joy in that prayer. The wow was, we're in this together. We love each other. We believe in justice. And we will continue working together. We feel something larger than ourselves, maybe just the community, maybe something beyond that, supporting us in this work. Now, I cannot tell you how many times people have come into my office over the years saying, I'm in despair. I mean, they're suffering in some way. It might be pain, it might be grief, it might be just their whole world seems to be falling apart in some way. They are suffering. And they go, I sure wish I believed in God, because I could yell at God and say, why are you doing this to me? Stop. Okay, well, that's a lament. That's a very human thing to do. You can lament. It really doesn't matter who you're praying to. Or how many people have told me, of all ages, I spent last evening talking out loud from my heart, trying to figure out my life. Now that sounded like a prayer to me, and they weren't even worried about who they were praying to. They just knew that they were thinking out loud with words. Or the family that came to me, the couple, and this was the first congregation I served in, and some of you know that was a very humanist fellowship. And when I first got there, the word God was actually the G word that you do not say. And so we worked on that. You know, we tried to become more open about all of religious experience, and you could use that word once in a while because some people use it, right? But at that time, nobody used it. And one of the families, their 4-year-old, was taking swimming lessons at the Y. And it was the first day where they were challenged to start swimming across the pool. Right? And you could tell, they said that he was kind of frightened, but also very determined. And the whole length of the pool, he's going, God help me, God help me, God help me, God help me. Well, this was a big deal to them. Where in the world did he get that from? He never heard that word in our house. Of course, we figured out that he learned it on watching cartoons, and Coyote blows everybody up and they're all in the clouds and there's angels and God up there. But all of these stories, what they lead me to suspect is that this reaching out to others, that which is bigger than themselves, whether we know who or what or why that is natural. It's part of being human. It's part of the human spirit, seeking that basic kind of biological evolutionary imperative to connect, the survival of the most connected. We know that now. Right? The survival of the most collaborative, the survival of those who know they are part of the interconnected web of all existence, of which we are part, right? So we've been working this month with this idea of prayer, and we've been using a working definition that we got from Mary Oliver, and actually listening to her talk about what she meant by prayer is attention. And this is a poet who recently passed away. And Mary Oliver talked about prayer as attention with empathy. So paying attention in relationship, paying attention in connection, right? Empathy. And as we've looked at that, we've looked at how we do that in different ways. As I talked about imagining a visual prayer of seeing each of the people in my family content. That's a visual prayer, really a Buddhist meditation. Or last week we talked about physical prayer and talked a lot about ecstatic dance, whirling dervishes and other such dancing. But of course, words are a large part of prayer for many people, because words are how we connect. When I went to divinity school so many years ago, I already knew how to pray with my body and visually. That's what came naturally to me. And many of you know I was a sculptor, dancer. Those things came naturally to me. But I did not know how to talk about what I thought was a spiritual life with words. I like to talk, but I was thinking out loud. That wasn't like being able to really communicate to people what I saw about religious experience in myself and in the people around me. And so, of course, I went to a very intellectual school thinking that they would give me the words. But my teacher, it was my pastoral care teacher, she understood that we needed to learn to talk about those words in other ways besides just intellectually. And she sent us all to a spiritual director school, which was right down the street. And spiritual direction was a Catholic tradition where the monks and the nuns would help develop each other's spirituality by discussing their prayer life. And so I went to this nun learning to be a spiritual director, and I was her guinea pig, and we talked about my prayer life. And for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to start finding words to talk about my inner experiences that were about meaning making and making sense of the ineffable things like love and connection, the wonder of the world that I didn't know how to talk about. And quite honestly, in the 5 years that I studied and went to spiritual direction, I came to understand that the whole religious project, from people studying ritual and cultural anthropology, to theology, to sacred scripture, to all of the spiritual autobiographies in the world, were all attempts to put this rich inner world of our experience of relating to that which is larger than ourselves into some kind of words. Now, those words were shaped by their culture, of course, like our language is shaped by our culture. But it was those words that helped people reach out and share that inner life. Now, one thing that I learned doing that is that how you put those things into words, it doesn't matter who's listening. Anybody here who's a writer, poet, songwriter, yes, you want somebody to listen to your words, right? I mean, you want that. You want to communicate on one level. That's what it's all about, why you work so hard to do that. But on another level, there's this kind of idea of the unknown reader. You have no idea who's going to read it. If anybody is, and you still do it, you don't know if anybody in this century is going to read it, or somebody's like, digging, your grandchildren are going to dig it out and say, oh, this was interesting. You don't know. I think prayer is so much like that. We don't know. And how I grew up, I was taught what one of my spiritual directors called the satellite theory of prayer. So the satellite theory of prayer is what Rachel very well described, where you're down here on earth and you're kind of beaming up your radio beams of what you're thinking or saying out loud up to a satellite, or as my husband calls it, the mothership. And, everybody's on the mothership and they're like, okay, we received this radio transmission. What are we going to do about it? Beep, beep, beep. And they send down radio beams back that either go to you or maybe even better yet to the people around you, because God forbid you should change. And and that they change, and your situation is automatically better. Or maybe the bacteria, that would be great if they got fixed. So this is this is how children think. This is a very concrete way to think about prayer, and that is part of human development, to think like that. But most adults don't really see it that way. And so I'm just going to join Annie Lamont and say, it really doesn't matter who you're praying to. On one level, yes, it matters in terms of for you to feel like this fits your spiritual journey and search. So in that way, it matters how you visualize it. But what really matters is that you tell the truth in your prayers. This is what I've learned. The most important thing is that the words tell the truth. And I want to tell you why I've learned that. Annie Dillard is hysterical about this. She's so not an expert on prayer, and so it's so refreshing when she writes about prayer. And I'm just going to tell you, read one little part about Prayer 101, telling the truth, before I get into the philosophy of it. She says, this is just a good example. I pray not to be such a whiny, self-obsessed baby, and give thanks that I am not quite as bad as I used to be. Talk about miracles. Then something comes up, and I overreact and blame and sulk, and it feels like I haven't made any progress at all. But it turns out I am less than a brat than before. And I hit the reset button much sooner, shake it off, and get my sense of humor back, which is good for her, because that's her bread and butter, her sense of humor. But there's a reason why this honesty in our prayer is so important. You see, prayer comes from our subjective experience. Now, when I look out at you, I have no idea, especially those of you that are like not quite awake yet and totally blank. I have no idea what you're thinking or feeling. I can't, you look at each other. You don't know your subjective experience. It's what's inside of you. So it's not like great objective experience. I can look at something and say, oh, there's 53 people here today, and oh no, there was 54, and we can count, and we can check it out. So when somebody talks about their subjective experience, how do you know it's true, right? How can you test it out? And this is the great problem with religion, but it's also the great reason why there's so many art forms, is because human people are always trying to figure out how to, what I think of as turning ourselves inside out so that we can connect, right? So and you can see this, like when in the hospital and you got somebody in pain, somebody say, don't touch that, I'm in pain. And then one of the doctors comes over and touches it. And they go, ah! The doctor can't see that pain, right? So, even with stuff that we think of as very concrete, it's very hard to measure subjective experience. Right? So when you come to these profound issues that people are struggling with about making meaning of their lives, and trying to connect that to all of their experience, the only way we can trust it is if people try to be honest and speak it as clearly as possible so that others can really see if it connects to their experience. I would say that's true of all the arts, quite honestly. It's what we mean that the arts need to come from authenticity, and why we value authenticity so much. But my experience is that when we come to what we call religion and spirituality, that's all we have, is our honest struggles to communicate. It's a profoundly moral, a profoundly ethical issue that has brought many of you people here today, both Rachel and Gail, we're both talking about coming here to this congregation because they were looking for a place that they could tell the truth about their spiritual lives, their religious lives, that they could be authentic. And in that way, you grow because you learn not only from speaking your own truth in prayer or to each other, but in hearing each other's truths. We grow. My experience isn't the only experience. My experience is not the sum total of all religious and spiritual experience. So that's what draws us here, is that search for honesty and authenticity for many of you. So in the end, the words themselves have so much power, but as many religious leaders know, the words themselves are only symbols and signs and interpretations of human experience. So the Zen Buddhists have a wonderful saying that I think sums it all up. They say, our path is a finger pointing to the moon. But people tend to look too much at that finger pointing. That's not what it's about, they would say. It's about the moon. So look beyond look beyond the words. That's what everybody's trying to do, is to speak that experience. So I just wanted to end today with a few questions. You know, what is the secret language of your soul, of your spirit? What does that longing for paying attention with empathy look like for you? How do you connect? How do you pray? May it be so.
Please rise in body or in spirit and join me in praying in song with number 370, All People That on Earth Do Dwell, hymn number 370.
In our chalice extinguishing, the words can be found at the bottom of your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I'd like to close with a prayer by the Buddhist monk who is in the process of passing away right now, Thich Nhat Hanh. Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become wholly ourselves. Let us be aware of the source of being common to us all and to all living things. Evoking the presence of the great compassion, let us fill our hearts with our own compassion toward ourselves and toward all living beings. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other. With humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us, let us practice the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. Amen. This service is over. Let our service begin again, renewed.